Mira Halden's ship shuddered as it passed through the turbulent clouds of the Nibari expanse. The storm winds tore at the small freighter, rattling panels and throwing sparks from the engines, but she gripped the controls with steady hands. Her heart raced, not from fear of the storm, but from the thought of what awaited her above, the palace of King Vorinth, ruler of the Dragon Kings. The floating city loomed ahead like a jagged crystal rising from the clouds. Massive towers spiraled toward the sky, glowing with molten light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Mira had seen pictures, read descriptions, studied maps, but nothing prepared her for the size of the dragons themselves. The Dragon Kings were said to be as tall as towers, their scales glowing with colors she couldn't name, eyes bright with intelligence and centuries of memory. Humans were insignificant here. Small. Fragile. Yet here she was, about to step into their world. Her ship docked on a wide landing platform, guarded by figures in armor that reflected the city's strange light. Mira stepped out, chest tight, hands clenched into fists. She reminded herself, she was not here to fight the dragons. She was here to communicate. To reach the one who no one else dared to reach. The mute son of the Dragon King, Caliph, sat in the throne room like a shadow. He was a young dragon, smaller than the others but still massive by human standards. His eyes flicked across the room, sharp and wary. He had never spoken, not a single sound since birth. The council of elders and visiting nobles ignored him, treating him as though he were air. No one had tried to connect with him, not until Mira. She stepped forward carefully, bowing her head as the room fell silent. The weight of 100 eyes watched her, some curious, some mocking. She knelt before Caliph, her hands raised in the first gesture of the universal sign protocol she had learned for alien species. Her fingers moved slowly, deliberately, forming shapes that conveyed greeting and respect. For a long moment nothing happened. Then Caliph's golden eyes widened slightly. A small gesture, almost imperceptible, a tap of a claw on the throne's arm, answered her. Mira's breath caught. It was faint, fragile, but it was alive. He was responding. Her heart pounded. She had studied countless alien languages, but this was different. Caliph's silence was not stubbornness. It was fear, isolation, perhaps distrust. Mira smiled softly. One human could not be invisible in a palace full of dragons, but perhaps one human could be brave enough to listen. She spoke in small gestures, asking him to show her his world. Caliph tilted his head, observing her. His eyes flicked to the massive tapestries on the walls, the glowing spheres that floated above the floor, the patterns of light that moved like living creatures. Then he pointed to a small section of the floor, a hatch leading to an underground chamber. Mira's pulse quickened. That hatch was forbidden. No visitor had ever touched it. The council noticed the exchange and stiffened. One elder hissed under his breath, warning others that the human had no right. Another whispered that the boy's silence was sacred, a shield no one should pierce. Mira ignored them, focusing on Caliph. Her courage was not blind. She knew the dangers of defying a Dragon King's council. Yet the stakes were higher than personal safety. Caliph tapped again, more insistently this time. Mira understood. He wanted her to follow. She hesitated, then rose, keeping her hands visible to show she carried no weapon. Guards flanked the hallway, watching every step. The air was thick with tension, heavy enough to make her lungs ache. Every sound echoed in the high-ceilinged corridors. One wrong move, one wrong gesture, and they could end her mission, or her life. She followed Caliph to the hatch. It was smaller than the human scale, but she squeezed through, careful not to alarm the sensors. The chamber below was dim, lit by faint bioluminescent panels. Strange machines hummed quietly, their purpose unclear. Caliph moved among them, tracing the shapes of controls with claws that were surprisingly delicate. Mira watched, fascinated and cautious. Something about this room felt important. Vital even. Caliph turned to her, eyes glowing faintly in the low light. He made another gesture, one she had not seen before. Mira frowned, then realized he was asking her to touch one of the controls. Her hands trembled, but she obeyed. Sparks ran across the panel, lights flickering. A low hum rose, like the heartbeat of the city itself. The sound drew attention. Footsteps pounded from above. Guards were coming. Mira froze for a heartbeat, weighing her choices. Caliph looked at her, eyes wide and expectant. She took a deep breath. One human could not fight all these dragons, but one human could act smart. Carefully, she followed the boy's gestures, adjusting the panel. The hum steadied. The lights brightened. Something shifted. Then the hatch above banged open. A shadow loomed. Mira's stomach dropped. She had gone too far, or perhaps just far enough. Kalitha's gaze locked on hers, a silent question passing between them. Could she survive what was coming? The figure descended, massive and imposing, and the dim chamber seemed to shrink under its presence. Mira knew the moment she had stepped into the Dragon King's palace, danger had been inevitable. But she had not come to cower. She had come to speak, to connect, to change the impossible. And now, as the shadow approached, she realized the first real test of her courage was about to begin. Mira barely had time to catch her breath when the first footsteps echoed down the chamber stairs. Heavy, deliberate, and inhuman. The Dragon King's guards were approaching fast, their claws clicking against the metal floors, armor plates shining faintly in the bioluminescent glow. Kalitha's golden eyes flicked to hers, wide with alarm but steady. He trusted her. She could not fail him. She ducked behind a row of humming machinery, every nerve alert. The hatch above creaked as the shadow of the lead guard passed over the opening. Mira's mind raced. One wrong move and they would strike. One misstep and not only her life, but Kalitha's fragile trust could be destroyed. Kalith made a small, quick gesture, pointing to a narrow maintenance tunnel that twisted deeper into the palace. Mira understood instantly. He was guiding her. She nodded, keeping her hands visible to show she meant no harm. Slowly, she moved, letting the hum of the machines mask her movement. The tunnel smelled faintly of ozone and molten metal. The guards' voices reached them, low and rumbling. A human in the chamber? Impossible. No outsider should be here, one growled. The tone was warning but edged with disbelief. Mira realized that these were not just soldiers, they were dragon engineers, trained to anticipate every human error and correct it before it happened. She had to think fast. Kalith pressed against the wall, signaling her to pause. Through the small opening of a grate, she could see a patrolling pair of guards turning toward the lower chamber. They hadn't noticed the tunnel but they were thorough. Mira swallowed hard. Humans were small, yes, but small could also be clever. She dropped to the floor, crawling silently, every sense stretched to its limit. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She remembered the schematics Kalith had shown her earlier, gestures that hinted at the machinery's function. If she could reach the central control node deeper in the tunnel, she might stabilize the systems, and maybe buy them enough time to escape detection. Her hands worked quickly, touching panels she did not fully understand, guided entirely by the boy's gestures. Sparks flickered. A low hum filled the air, steadying. A sudden metallic clang made her freeze. One of the guards had found the previous chamber, and their approach was faster than she expected. Kalith hissed, a low, frightened sound, and pressed his body closer to hers. Mira's heart twisted. The boy's fear was sharp, real, and contagious, but it also fueled her determination. She could not let him see defeat in her eyes. She moved again, hands flying over alien circuitry. The controls responded, lights stabilizing, vents shifting airflow to mask their presence. For a moment, she dared a glance at Kalith. He was watching her, silent but attentive, eyes glowing with something like hope. She had to succeed. She had to prove that one human mind could overcome the impossible, even against centuries of dragon ingenuity. Then the first guard's shadow appeared in the tunnel mouth. Mira froze. The figure loomed, claws flexing. She could hear the hum of the energy core in the distance, vibrating in her chest. One human against a dragon guard was impossible. But she remembered something from her training. Dragons relied on their sight as much as their instincts. If she could disrupt the lighting, mask her movements, she might just slip past. Quickly, she activated a small panel above her head. Lights flickered, panels hummed, and a sheet of shadow swept across the tunnel. The guard hissed, pausing to adjust to the sudden change. Mira crawled silently behind Kalith, gripping the boy's clawed hand for guidance. Every inch felt like a mile, every second stretched into eternity. The tunnel narrowed, forcing her to crouch, and sparks flew from exposed wiring. A sudden shock jolted her hand, pain lanced up her arm, but she gritted her teeth and kept moving. Humans survived through ingenuity and determination. Pain was temporary, the mission was not. They reached a secondary chamber, a small control hub filled with glowing panels and holographic displays. Mira glanced at Kalith. His gestures were quick, precise, pointing to a malfunctioning core and then to a backup console. She nodded, understanding immediately. This was it. If she could reroute the energy flow here, they could stabilize the systems and prevent the alarm from spreading. Her fingers flew over controls, improvising, translating the boy's gestures into action. Sparks flared, circuits hummed, and a low vibration ran through the floor. The guards were close. She could hear their claws against the metal above, their breathing low and steady, but she did not stop. Her mind focused entirely on the task. One human mind, one human hand, guided by the boy who had never spoken. Together they could change the impossible. Finally, a soft chime echoed through the chamber. Lights stabilized. The hum steadied. The systems were back online. Mira allowed herself a single, sharp breath. Caliph looked at her, eyes wide and shining, and made a small, deliberate gesture. He trusted her completely. But the danger was far from over. From above, the sound of the hatch opening grew louder. The guards were not fooled for long. Mira knew that their reprieve was temporary, and the council would not forgive intrusion. Her mind raced with possibilities. One thing was certain. She had earned Calitha's trust, but the next step could cost them both. And in that silent, dim chamber, Mira realized something thrilling and terrifying at once. Humans were small, yes, but they could outthink giants. One human courage, one mind willing to risk everything, could shift the balance against being centuries older, stronger, and wiser. The footsteps above grew closer. The chamber shook slightly as the guards descended. Mira gritted her teeth, gripping Calitha's hand tightly. The real challenge was about to begin. Mira pressed her back against the wall of the narrow tunnel, listening to the heavy, rhythmic footfalls of the guards above. Every beat echoed like a drum in her chest. Calith crouched beside her, golden eyes wide, his tail flicking nervously but steadily. He trusted her, completely, and that trust was a weight she could not drop. "Stay calm," she whispered, more to herself than to him. One human could not match a dragon in strength, but humans survived through cleverness, not brute force. Her mind raced. The tunnel split ahead, two routes twisting into darkness. One led back toward the lower chambers, the one the guards had passed, but the other descended deeper toward the city's energy nexus. If they reached that, she could stabilize the system permanently. But it was forbidden territory. Dangerous. Unknown. Calith tapped toward the deeper path, the gesture sharp and insistent. Mira nodded. She did not hesitate. The human mind could calculate risks faster than centuries-old caution. Survival was not luck, it was strategy. The deeper tunnel was colder, the air humming with power. Panels embedded in the walls glowed faintly, casting eerie shadows. Myra's fingers brushed against the surfaces as she moved, feeling the subtle vibrations of energy flowing through the structure. One misstep could trigger a security alert, a trap, or worse. She focused, shutting out fear. She had to act with precision or they would be caught. A low rumble shook the tunnel. Mira froze, heart hammering. Above, the guards' voices echoed, confused and frustrated. "She's still in the system," one growled. "Impossible, no human should be here." Mira allowed herself a thin smile. They underestimated her. That was humanity's advantage: cunning, courage, and a refusal to accept limits. Calith guided her to a massive control console, cables stretching like veins into the walls. The core of the city's energy system pulsed before them, alive with light. Myra's breath caught. She had never touched such alien technology, yet she could see patterns, logic hidden beneath centuries of dragon engineering. One human mind could not grasp it fully, but with Calith's gestures she could improvise. "Watch," Calith signed, pointing to a panel that flickered erratically. Sparks danced across its surface. The console was unstable and the system could collapse at any second. Myra's pulse raced. She placed her hands on the controls, using the boy's gestures to guide her movements. Fingers flew, twisting, rerouting, improvising circuits that no dragon had touched in decades. A sudden screech echoed through the tunnel. One of the guards had discovered the diversion system and was moving to intercept them. Myra's mind snapped into overdrive. The energy nexus could be both a trap and a shield. If she could overload the auxiliary circuits at the right moment, she could mask their presence long enough to escape. But timing would be everything. Sparks flared as she rerouted power, light reflecting in Calith's eyes. He tapped rapidly, pointing to the next connection, urging her to move faster. Myra's heart pounded, she had only seconds. Her hands trembled, but her mind was clear. Every human instinct, every lesson from survival training, every ounce of courage she had poured into her actions. The main panel flickered violently. An alarm began to hum faintly, a warning the system was destabilizing. Mira gritted her teeth. Humans survived by thinking where others froze. She redirected a plasma conduit into a feedback loop, using Calith's precise signs to guide her adjustments. The conduit flared, sparks arcing dangerously, but the system stabilized. A soft hum replaced the alarm. The light steadied. The energy flowed smoothly once more. Calith pressed close, eyes shining with awe. For the first time, Mira saw relief in his expression, a small but genuine smile. One human mind, guided by a boy who could not speak, had prevented disaster. But the relief was fleeting. The sound of the hatch above intensified. Guards were close, closer than ever. Mira glanced around the Nexus chamber. The exit was narrow, guarded, impossible for humans to pass without alerting the entire palace. Yet one human could improvise. She noticed a service conduit running along the wall, just wide enough to crawl through. It led directly to the central hallway. She could fit, they could escape. Her body pressed against the metal. Sparks flew from loose wiring. Pain lanced through her hands as she pulled herself forward, Caliph following, claws scraping carefully but without noise. A shadow fell across the far wall. One guard had discovered the chamber. Mira froze, calculating in a heartbeat. Humans survived by using what the giants overlooked. She slammed her hands on the conduit's access panel. Lights flickered, drawing the guard's attention to the wrong side. He hissed, turning to investigate. Mira seized the chance, dragging Caliph through the narrow passage. The conduit twisted sharply, dark and suffocating. Myra's lungs burned, her muscles screamed, but she pressed on. Fear sharpened her focus. She had to survive, not just for herself but for the boy who trusted her completely. A misstep would mean failure, perhaps death, perhaps losing Caliph forever. Finally they emerged into the main hallway, unnoticed. Mira gasped for air, chest heaving. Caliph looked at her, eyes wide with wonder and gratitude. They had done it. The impossible had been done. One human had outsmarted centuries of dragon vigilance. But the council would not forgive this intrusion. Their triumph was temporary. Mira knew it. Danger still lurked in every corridor, every shadow, every unseen eye. The next move would demand even more courage, more ingenuity. The city of giants had just begun to test the small human who dared defy them. And as they pressed forward, deeper into the palace, Mira realized something exhilarating and terrifying. Humans might be small, but courage, determination and cleverness could make them giants among dragons. Mira and Caliph emerged into the main hallway, the vast chamber stretching above them like the inside of a cathedral. Light from floating orbs cast long, shifting shadows on the walls. Every footstep echoed with authority, every sound amplified by the high ceilings. Myra's heart hammered. The Dragon King's council would be here soon. They always sensed disorder before it happened. Calitha's eyes flicked toward a massive stairwell leading to the throne room. The council, she knew, would be waiting there, their ancient presence a wall of judgment and power. But there was no turning back. The boy had trusted her completely. One human mind, one human hand could not fail now. They moved quickly but cautiously, Mira keeping her small frame pressed against the shadows, Calitha's glowing eyes guiding her like a beacon. Every corridor had sensors, every corner a hidden watcher. She had anticipated some but not all. A sudden hiss of warning from a nearby console made her duck. Sparks leapt from a misaligned panel, igniting a small flare. Caliph jumped, claws scraping the floor, but Mira steadied herself, signaling him to remain calm. Ahead, the throne room doors loomed. Mira could see the council's massive forms through the translucent panels. Their eyes glimmered with suspicion and disapproval. The Dragon King himself, Vorinth, sat at the center, his scales glinting in muted sunlight. Caliph stiffened. Mira felt the weight of their gaze pressing down, but she forced herself to walk forward with confidence. Humans survived not by hiding, but by confronting impossible odds with clarity and courage. The doors opened with a rumble. Mira and Caliph stepped inside. A hush fell. The council's whispers stopped mid-phrase. Guards shifted uneasily, sensing the breach. And then the king's gaze fell on her. "You have interfered where no human has dared," Vorintha's voice rumbled, deep and commanding. "Why?" Mira lifted her chin. "Because lives were at stake," she said, her voice steady. "Because one human can see what centuries of dragons overlook. Because this boy trusts me." Her gaze shifted to Caliph. The young dragon's eyes shone with hope, vulnerability, and determination all at once. The council murmured. Disbelief edged their faces. A human, fragile, small, mortal, stood calmly before them and spoke with authority. The audacity alone was shocking. Caliph signed quickly, pointing to the energy nexus she had stabilized. He indicated the risk the palace had been under, the systems failing, and the potential disaster averted. Mira mirrored his gestures as she spoke. Her human mind had improvised, outthinking the systems the dragons had built over centuries. Vorintha's massive claw hovered over the floor. Silence stretched, tense and sharp. Then slowly the king inclined his head. A gesture of acknowledgement, but also of testing. Myra's pulse surged. The king's respect could change everything for humans. She had one chance to prove her point fully. She moved toward the central control console in the throne room, guided by Kalitha's gestures. Sparks flickered across panels, reflecting in her eyes. The council tensed, ready to strike, but Myra's mind worked faster than they could anticipate. She rerouted power to strengthen the shields protecting the city's lower levels. Lights stabilized across the palace, the hum steadying to a deep, resonant pulse. The council's jaws tightened. None had thought a human capable of such precision. Kalitha's gestures became more confident, faster, precise. Together, human intuition and dragon insight formed a partnership the elders could not ignore. Finally, the main panels glowed steadily. The threat that had gone unnoticed for weeks was neutralized. The energy systems hummed perfectly. Mira stepped back, exhausted but triumphant. She had achieved the impossible. One human, alone with a mute boy, had outsmarted centuries of engineering and preserved the safety of the floating city. Vorantha's eyes softened. "You have done what none before you could," he rumbled. "A human mind, paired with my son's insight, has saved this kingdom." The council remained silent, shocked but slowly bowing their heads in acknowledgement. Kalitha's tail swished in relief. For the first time he moved closer to Mira, his expression softening. He had found a partner in courage, someone who saw him not as weak but as capable. Mira smiled faintly, feeling the weight of the city's recognition settle around her shoulders. But the triumph was more than technical. It was symbolic. Humans, once fragile and underestimated, had proven their value. Intelligence, empathy, courage, and determination had overcome impossible odds. Mira felt the depth of that truth pressing in. The city, the dragons, and the council now saw that humans were not just survivors, they could be heroes. The whispers of the council began to shift, from doubt to respect, from suspicion to acknowledgement. Kalith signed again, clearly pointing to Mira. "You saved us." She nodded, a lump in her throat. One human had changed not just systems but perspectives. Voranth inclined his massive head once more. "Your actions will be remembered," he said. "The humans are no longer strangers to this kingdom. Their courage has earned a place among us." Myra's chest swelled with a mix of relief, pride, and awe. The boy she had come to help had not just been saved, he had been empowered. And humanity, through her courage and determination, had claimed a victory that would ripple through the palace for decades. Even as the tension faded, Mira knew the work was not over. The council would watch, the palace would test, and challenges would arise. But for now, one small human had triumphed against giants, and the impossible had been made real. Above the city, the storm clouds parted just enough for sunlight to shine through, glinting on the towers and reflecting in Myra's eyes. She smiled faintly at Kalith. Together they had done what no one thought possible. And somewhere deep in the heart of the palace, the council, the city, and even the Dragon King himself understood one undeniable truth. Humans could rise, and when they did, nothing could stop them. The city above the clouds was quiet for the first time in weeks. Sunlight glimmered across the floating towers, bouncing off molten-colored scales and casting golden streaks across the palace halls. Mira Halden stood on a balcony, the wind tugging at her hair, heart still pounding from the trials below. She had survived impossible odds, outsmarted the Dragon King's council, and protected Kalith, the boy who had trusted her completely. Kalith emerged from the throne room behind her, moving with a confidence that had been absent before. His tail swished slowly, his eyes bright, and for the first time, he approached her without hesitation. He signed quickly, deliberately, the gestures clear and strong. "Thank you." Mira smiled softly, her chest tightening. One human had changed not just the boy's life, but the perception of all humans in the palace. The Dragon King Voranth appeared beside them, massive and imposing even in the soft light. He regarded Mira with quiet reverence. "You have done what none of us thought possible," he said, his deep voice like rolling thunder softened by sincerity. "Your courage and skill have saved lives and changed the course of this kingdom. The humans are no longer mere visitors or curiosities. They have proven their worth." Mira swallowed, humbled. She had not come seeking praise. She had come to connect with a boy who had been ignored, to make a difference. And now the difference was greater than she had imagined. Kalitha's eyes sparkled with pride and relief. He had found a voice even without words, and it was hers that had guided him. Word spread quickly. Across the floating city, dragons whispered of the human who had stabilized the energy cores, outsmarted their security, and acted with courage when others would have frozen. Guards who had once sneered at her now bowed their heads in respect. Engineers who had dismissed her knowledge came forward, eager to learn the methods she had used, the improvisation born of human ingenuity. Mira and Caliph spent the next days in the lower chambers, teaching what they had discovered. The boys' gestures became language, expanded, refined, and understood by more dragons than anyone had expected. And the humans, small, underestimated, fragile, found themselves welcomed into areas of the palace once forbidden. Not as servants or observers but as thinkers, creators and problem solvers. The council was hesitant at first, their ancient pride slow to bend. But the results spoke for themselves. Shields remained stable, systems were optimized, and the city moved with a new efficiency that reflected both dragon and human insight. Mira had shown that courage and intellect were not measured in size or lifespan, but in determination and moral resolve. Caliph watched her, a rare smile lighting his face. For the first time he played among the younger dragons openly, laughing silently, communicating freely. Mira felt a warmth spread through her chest. The boy who had been silent, ignored and isolated was now strong, confident and empowered, all because one human had dared to step forward. Yet even in triumph, Mira knew the work of connection was ongoing. Humans would continue to be small and fragile, but their ingenuity and empathy had earned a place in the palace. Other humans would come, she realized, and the dragons would begin to see them as allies, as equals in problem-solving and courage. The world was changing, slowly, and she had helped set that motion in motion. She thought back to the first moments in the palace, the danger, the fear, the uncertainty. One misstep could have ended everything. But humans survived by thinking, by risking, by refusing to accept limitations imposed by giants or ancient authority. One mind, one courageous heart, had shifted centuries of tradition and expectation. Vorinth inclined his massive head again, this time not in testing but in acknowledgement. "You have taught my son courage and you have taught this palace humility," he said. "The human spirit is stronger than many believe. Remember this, Caliph, and carry it always." Caliph pressed close to Mira, signing one last gesture. "We are ready now." She nodded. It was not just a message of gratitude, it was a declaration. Together, human and dragon, they had created a new bond, one that would endure beyond fear, beyond prejudice, beyond centuries of isolation. As Mira gazed over the city, she realized something profound. Humans were small but their hearts were not. One act of bravery, one moment of ingenuity, could shift the balance of power, rewrite history and inspire generations. The Nibari expanse would never see humans the same way again. And somewhere in the swirling clouds below, the world itself seemed to respond. Light shimmered across the expanse, reflecting the promise of change, hope and courage. Mira knew that while this chapter had ended, the legacy had only begun. Humans had proven they could face giants, think where others froze and act where others hesitated. Caliph looked at her again, eyes bright and full of silent words. Mira smiled. She had come to save a boy. Instead, she had saved a kingdom, and in doing so, humanity itself had risen to a place it had never occupied before. Courage, intelligence, determination, and moral resolve had triumphed against impossible odds. Above the clouds, the floating city gleamed like a beacon of hope. And for the first time, Mira felt the true weight of her achievement. One human, small but fearless, had changed everything.